All right, I'm going to make a video of the 5 primary movers of the shoulder girdle. I'm going to use the Theraband connecting O to I to show the line of pull. So the Theraband is going to represent the line of pull for each of the muscles. Okay, and so we're going to look at the muscles that elevate. So obviously they'd have to be start above and attach below to pull it superior. Start below and attach above to pull it inferior. That would be depression. Start anterior and attach to the front of the scapula to protract it. Doesn't make sense that they would start or originate on the vertebral column over to the medial border to be retractors. Now I know there's upward and downward rotation. We're going to look at those functionally in lecture, so not necessarily in lab this week. Okay, so I do have to put the occiput on. Okay, let me move this back a little bit. Move this forward. Okay, the head is not too sturdy. Okay, we have the occipital protuberance, we have the top 7 cervical vertebrae, and I didn't mention this before, there's a ligament, picture my finger as the ligament, that runs along the tips of the spinous process. That would be the nuchal ligament, okay? And so the upper trapezius originates on the occiput, and the nuchal ligament, which really runs along the spinous processes, to come over to the lateral clavicle and acromion. So I'm going to take the occiput away. Okay. Picture, here is your upper trapezius. Okay. So can y'all see that it would pull the acromion and clavicle in a superior direction, and that would result in elevation of the scapula. Okay. The upper trapezius is innervated by the 11th cranial nerve or spinal accessory. The other elevator of the scapula, the levator scapula, named after its action, transverse processes of the first 4 cervical vertebrae over to the superior angle. So again, here it is. So can you see it pulling the scapula in a superior position if I could move my scapula? So those are your 2 elevators. The levator scapula is innervated by the dorsal scapular nerve. Okay, now in terms of, let's see, anything else I want to say? Nerve roots for the upper trap, C3 and C4. The upper trap is an upward rotator, but we're not going to worry about it right now. The levator scapula nerve roots, 3rd and 4th cervical vertebrae, nerve roots C3, C4 originates on the first 4 cervical transverse processes. So dorsal scapular nerve. It's an elevator and a downward rotator. But for this week, we're going to just look at in lab, just its role as a scapular elevator. All right, let's look at the depressor. Okay, that would be the lower trapezius. The lower trapezius comes from the middle. You don't even have to be too specific about it. The middle and lower thoracic vertebrae. And it's going to come up to that root, that medial portion of the spine of the scapula. So picture the scapula being in an elevated, an abducted position Can y'all see that this muscle is going to pull the scapula in depression down and also retraction inward, because the origin sits lower and medial to the insertion. The insertion is up here at the spine, the medial portion of the spine of the scapula. So lower trapezius has the same innervation. All three portions of the trapezius, even though they do separate actions, are innervated by the spinal accessory nerve, which is cranial nerve 11, also nerve roots 3 and 4. Okay? So that would be your prime mover for scapular depression. Let's finish up with the middle trapezius. So the spinous processes of C7 down to T3, that's where my spinous scapula lines up with T3, comes over across like this, across to the spine of the scapula, okay? So you can see the origin is the vertebral column, the insertion is the spine. So hopefully you can see this muscle moving the scapula in retraction. Okay? Spinal accessory, cranial nerve 11. Cranial nerve 11 is the spinal accessory nerve. Also C3 and 4 nerve roots. So now we just looked at all three portions. All three portions of the trapezius. Upper trap elevator, middle trap retractor, lower trap depressor. Okay. We looked at the levator scapula as well. All right, so now we got to look at the rhomboids, the other prime movers for retraction. And they originate from C7 down to T5, okay? They run across to the medial border of the scapula. So my Theraband isn't wide enough, but if it was, let's just do it this way. So just picture a bunch of pieces of Theraband running between the vertebral column and the medial border of the scapula. I'm going to pull the scapula in retraction, okay? The rhomboids, there's a major and a minor. We don't need to worry about separating them. Again, C7 through T3, T5, sorry. Dorsal scapular nerve, so the same nerve as the levator scapula, dorsal scapular, and C5 nerve root. Okay, so now we have the two retractors. We have the middle trap, we have the rhomboids. We have the upper trap and levator in elevation. We have the lower trap in depression. Okay, we've got to turn the body around to look at the two protractors. Okay, the two protractors are the serratus anterior and the pectoralis minor. Okay, so the pectoralis minor originates on ribs 3, 4, 5 and up to the coracoid process. Okay, so you can see the origin is anterior to the insertion, so it's going to pull the scapula around the rib cage. That's protraction. Now, do you remember how we palpated the coracoid process? We went sternal notch, clavicle, lateral clavicle, drop down 2 to 3 fingers. Think you're on it. Ask your partner to put their hand on their tummy and push. What you're really doing is protracting the scapula. So when we do this, let me back up a little bit. Okay, when I do this motion, push into my tummy, you can see my shoulder girdle is protracting. Okay, so if I find the coracoid process, drop down, now I'm on the belly of the pectoralis minor. So we want to drop just a little inferior and medial to the coracoid. You can feel it popping right out. Okay? Now the serratus is a little bit harder to see because it originates on the sides. Let's see, let's get the sides of the first 8 ribs. Got a jagged or serrated appearance, but then it's going to go all the way to the front. So I'm showing you the line of pull. It goes to the anterior surface, way over to the vertebral border. So again, it's going to pull. This is the origin. The ribs are the origin because it's attached to the front of the scapula. If my hand was the scapula, okay, here's the rib cage. It's going to pull the scapula forward. That's called protraction. Okay. So in terms of innervation, serratus anterior, long thoracic nerve, and nerve root C5, C6, C7. So sides of the top lateral surfaces, first 8 ribs, over to the anterior surface of the scapula near that vertebral border. So you gotta get your fingers all the way under there. Okay? The pectoralis minor, ribs, anterior surface 3, 4, 5, up to the coracoid. It's innervated by the medial pectoral nerve in C8 and T1. It also, besides pulling the scapula forward in protraction, can you all see, here's the coracoid, my finger's on the coracoid. If the scapula was up in the air, can you see how this muscle would pull the scapula down? So it's also a depressor, and it participates in downward rotation. Upward and downward rotation we're going to look at in lecture. Okay? So I'm going to do this one more time real quick. Okay? And here's your upper trap. Here's your levator. Those are elevators. Here's your middle trap. Here's your rhomboids. Those are retractors. Here's your lower trap. That would be your depressor. And then from the front, we got the pectoralis minor. And then we have the serratus anterior. All right, give it a shot.